Good afternoon. This is the Devar Torah um, for Pesach. It's dealing partially with the seventh day of Pesach, Shavi Pesach. And what I want to deal with, this is also relevant to the seventh day, I want to deal with the number of makos, the number of plagues that occurred in both Egypt and at the Yam Suf, crossing the Red Sea, incorrectly referred to as the Red Sea. Now, there are two primary sources of how many plagues there are. How many plagues Hashem brought on the Egyptians in Mitzrayim and at the Yam Suf. And now it mentions in the Chumash of the plagues at Egypt. The first of these is the fifth Mishnah in fifth chapter Pirkei Avos, which states there were 10 miracle plagues in Egypt and 10 at the Yam Suf, and there were 10 miracles for the Jews in Egypt and 10 miracles for the Jews in at the Yam Suf. The second is the famous Price of the Gada, which states the opinions of Rabbi Yosef Galili, Rabbi Eliezer, and Rabbi Akiva. It was originally come from the Mekilta of Rav Shimon Bar Yochai, the author of the Zohar, and there are tie-ins to that which are beyond the scope of this particular Devar Torah. There are a number of questions regarding the meaning of this Price. And how can be understood in connection with Mishnah says 10 and 10? And also raise a question what are the miracles for the Jews in both Egypt and at the Yam Suf. So I'd like to ask a question. Is here a contradiction between Rabbi Akiva and the Mishnah in Pirkei Avos? Now, since the Mishnah is a star Mishnah, which means anonymous Mishnah, means it was written by Rabbi Meir, his Rebbe is Rabbi Akiva. The Mishnah states there's only 10 and 10. 10 plagues and 10 miracles at the Yam Suf, and 10 miracles at the Yam Suf and also in Mitzrayim. So how can Rabbi Akiva say with 50 plagues at Mitzrayim, 250 at the Yam Suf, for a total of 300 plagues? That also applies to the other opinions. In addition, as I already asked, what was the nature of the plagues that occurred? Now, all three opinions agree there were 5 times as many plagues in the Yam Suf as during Mitzrayim. What's the reason for this? Because if you look, it talks about the magicians with the plague of lice, talks about that's the finger of God. They couldn't replicate that plague. And it talks about, and so that was a finger of Hashem. And when it talks about the deliverance, it's talking about the hands with the Hashem's hand. The miracle happened at the Yams, and therefore hand has 5 fingers. Another question, Rabbi Eliezer says that in Mitzrayim each plague was really 4 plagues, and Rabbi Akiva says 5. Now, why doesn't Rabbi Yossi Galili multiply the number of plagues in Mitzrayim? Why does he disagree with both Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Akiva? Now, the plagues in Mitzrayim are well known. They're listed in the Haggadah. They're very well known. The 10 plagues in the Yam Suf are not as well known. They're not specifically referred to in the Chumash. They are mentioned in Mechilta of Rabbi Ishmael, and also by Rabbeinu Yonah, Rishon, and one of the medieval commentators. And these are that although the sun rose after the Jews had transferred to Yam Suf, The Egyptians were still kept in darkness by the clouds of glory. Second, the clouds of glory turned the hard ground into clay. Third, the heat burned off the wheels of their chariots, which going into the sea. The fifth, although the horses' hooves fell off, the Egyptians tumbled into the mud and couldn't get up. Sixth, when the water flowed back towards the Egyptians, they could not escape because in every direction they ran, they were confronted by water. Obviously, only by Hashem's miracle could that happen. The seventh is the Egyptians were tossed from the sea by Hashem, and as they sunk, the lower depths sent them back to the upper depths. The eighth is some of the Egyptians were covered by mud at the bottom of the sea. The ninth, depending on the degree of evil, some Egyptians sank like lead and died quickly, and others died slowly and more painfully. And the 10th one is all the bodies of Egyptians were rejected by the Yam Suf, so the Bnei Yisrael could see their feared enemies were clearly dead and never had to worry about them again for all eternity. Okay. Now, there were 5 times the number of plagues at the location. We can say it's a greater relation of Hashem's power and glory than in Egypt. Or obviously, Gluli does quote Pesachim as the basis of distinction, did not explain its underlying significance. The crossing of the Yam Suf by Bnei Israel and the subsequent drowning of the Egyptians occurred 7 days after the exodus from Mitzrayim. That day became the seventh day of Pesach. Each day and period of the Jewish year are imbued with Hashem with special qualities and characteristics. These are 2 days. These are 2 days which reflect Hashem's open intervention in the world with miracles and wonders, namely the 21st of Nisan and the 22nd of first of Tishrei, 7th day of Pesach, and 7th day of Sukkot. The 7th day of Sukkot is a Shana Rabbah, which is a discussion for another Devar Torah. Now in the Gemara, Rosh Hashanah Daf 12b, that the world, by the way, just to explain the context of this, the world of the 25th of the first day of creation, according to one opinion, is the 25th of Elul, and therefore Rosh Hashanah, Rosh Chodesh Nis, Tishrei would be the first day, and the 25th, and according to the other opinion, it would be one was Elul and Tishrei, and the second opinion is that the world was created on the 25th of Adar, and the 6th day of creation, the creation of man and woman, was on Rosh Chodesh Nisan. And if you look, the 21st of, in this case, we're dealing with Nisan. Also, and this is all based on the Rabbi Bakia Kedekemach, that the 26th, when we go from the 25th of Adar to the 21st of Nisan, you get 26 days. That really represents the name Yud-Kei Vav-Kei, which is Hashem's control of the establishment of over the universe. Yud Kei Vav, gematria of 21, represents Hashem's mastery over man's destiny. Applying this to the seventh day of Pesach, it's a day of the open revelation shown of man through the use of nature. Since that day is a revelation of Hashem to the entire world, follows to be many more plagues against Egypt, Egyptians, and greater miracles of Jewish people met in Mitzrayim, because this is fully showing full open mastery. The duality of plagues that were imposed on Pharaoh and the Egyptians. Why is this duality? Namely, that Pharaoh denied Hashem both his capacity as Yud Kei Vav Kei, the creator of the universe, and as the guiding one of mankind. When Pharaoh answered Moshe, Moshe said to Pharaoh, "Let my people go," he says, "I do not recognize Yud Kei Vav Kei, thus denying Hashem as the creator of the universe, nor will I let the Jewish people go," showing Hashem as the control of mankind. Therefore, the plagues sent by Hashem reflect both of these aspects. Now, that still leaves the question of how do you reconcile the mission of Pirkei Avos, 10 plagues in Yam Suf and 10 plagues in Mitzrayim. And this is being, one explanation is brought by the Maharil Rav of Prague, Rav Yitzchak Chava, a Talmid of the Vilna Gaon. And this explains, according to the last two opinions, Rabbi Eliezer and Rav Kiva, that these plagues represent the four spiritual elements with which Hashem created the earth, the universe, namely afar, earth. These are spiritual qualities of Aish, fire, Mayim, water, and Ruach, air, as well as the ethereal unifying force underlying those known as Helio, Terem Bar from the Greeks. Therefore, each one of these numerous plagues represent one of these five spiritual elements. So what do you say? The 10 plagues represent Pirkei Avos, the general quality plagues, and the other plagues are subcomponents. Now, Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Eliezer discussing number of plagues in Mitzrayim, whether there were 4 or 5. The true dispute is whether Hashem is responding to Pharaoh by sending plagues representing the 4 spiritual elements described above, or as Rabbi Akiva states, Pharaoh is also denying the essential unity of creation represented by the 5th element. Now, why doesn't Rabbi Yossi Galili go and use this pasuk? He said 10 plagues. One thing we might say is, between the dispute of Rabbi Yossi Galili on one hand and Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Eliezer on the other, can be explained as follows. Rabbi Yossi holds there that Hashem's main purpose in Mitzrayim was to demonstrate his control of nature and to liberate the Jewish people. The plagues of Yam Suf, their primary goal was demonstrating to the world that Hashem controls history and the affairs of mankind. Where do Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Eliezer agreed? They emphasized the aspect of punishment of Pharaoh and the Egyptian denial of Hashem's creation of the universe, even at the expense of weakening the demonstrations of Hashem's power over man at the Yam Suf. Now, with this, we can hopefully develop a greater understanding of Hashem's control over nature and history. So we will get rid of the narrow human-minded view of the universe, human-oriented, human-centered, and this is particularly relevant at the time we are in now, where we have to understand that Hashem is controlling anything, both their miracles, even though we've had some casualties. Overall, the miracles that the systems will, Hashem inspired people to develop the systems that protected us from most of the missiles. I realize they're not perfect, but most of the missiles is, and that's Derek, both Derek Ateva and also miraculous. A number of the missiles didn't explode, or if they did explode, they explode into empty fields. May Hashem, as he's waging his wars on our behalf, shall recall, just as he did it at in Mitzrayim Yam Suf, we're seeing a far beginning of a far greater um, revelation of Hashem's uh, role in both nature and history as the current events are unfolding now. May we all have a good Pesach, one where we raise our levels as we're counting days of Sfera, so we'll be merit, Matan Torah and Shavuos, in 47 plus days. And I want to wish everybody a safe and kosher and meaningful Pesach Chag Sameach.